Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine sitting alone in a dark room. No phone, no distractions, only silence. For most people, that silence feels unbearable. But for Carl Jung, the legendary psychologist, this silence was not an enemy. It was a doorway. A doorway into the deepest parts of the human soul. This is the hidden power of loneliness. A power most of us fear, but few ever understand. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter most to you." In other words, loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about being misunderstood, being unseen, being disconnected from the very essence of yourself. In today's world, where we're constantly connected yet strangely more isolated than ever before, Jung's exploration of loneliness feels almost prophetic. He believed that loneliness was not merely a psychological problem to be solved, but a necessary step in the journey toward wholeness. Tonight, we're going to uncover what Jung truly meant. We'll dive into the shadowy corners of the human mind, explore the transformative role of solitude, and reveal why loneliness might actually be the greatest hidden teacher of your life. To Jung, loneliness was not just a feeling, it was a signal. It pointed to the fact that something within us had been ignored for too long. Think about it. When you're surrounded by noise, endless conversations, and social masks, do you really hear yourself? Loneliness strips all of that away. It forces you to confront the voice inside your head that you've been running from. Jung described this as meeting your shadow. The shadow is the part of you that hides behind the mask of who you pretend to be. It contains all the fears, desires, and wounds you've buried. And when you sit in loneliness long enough, the shadow begins to whisper. But here's the paradox. Most people run from loneliness because it's uncomfortable. But if you stay with it, if you dare to sit in the silence, you begin to discover that the very thing you feared becomes your source of strength. Jung's greatest contribution to psychology was the idea of individuation. This is the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, not who society tells you to be, not who your family expects, but the authentic self that lies beneath. And here's the secret: individuation cannot happen without loneliness. Why? Because the path of individuation is a path of separation. You must separate from the collective voice of the crowd. You must stand alone, away from the constant noise of society, to hear the whisper of your own soul. Loneliness, in this sense, is not a curse, it's an initiation. It's the symbolic desert that every mystic, prophet, and thinker had to walk through. Christ in the wilderness, Buddha under the Bodhi tree, Jung himself, during his confrontation with the unconscious, when he deliberately withdrew from the world to face his inner visions. He discovered that loneliness forces you to wrestle with yourself. And in that wrestling, you are reborn. Let's shift for a moment. Think of the greatest works of art, philosophy, and invention in history. How many of them were born in crowded rooms filled with distractions? Very few. Jung believed that loneliness creates the conditions for creativity. Because when you're alone, the walls between your conscious mind and your unconscious begin to thin. Ideas rise up from the depths, images, dreams, archetypes, that can only be heard in silence. In fact, Jung's entire concept of the collective unconscious, a realm of symbols shared across humanity, was discovered during his loneliest years. The Red Book, his most profound work, was written not when he was surrounded by people, but when he was completely isolated, facing his inner visions. So perhaps the next time you feel lonely, ask yourself, what masterpiece is trying to be born through me? But let's be honest. Most of us don't embrace loneliness. We escape it. We drown it with social media, endless scrolling, shallow conversations, and external noise. Jung warned about this. He believed that avoiding loneliness leads to a shallow existence, a life where you never truly meet yourself. Because if you can't sit with yourself in silence, how will you ever know who you are? Worse, the more you run from loneliness, the more power your shadow gains. It will show up in addictions, toxic relationships, and restless anxiety. What you refuse to face in solitude will eventually control you in society. There's another layer here. For Jung, loneliness was not just psychological, it was deeply spiritual. He believed that solitude connects us to the archetype of the self, the divine center within us that is greater than the ego. In loneliness, the walls of the ego begin to crack. And through those cracks, the self begins to shine. This is why mystics throughout history sought solitude. They knew that only in silence could they encounter the numinous, the mysterious presence of something greater than themselves. To Jung, loneliness was never emptiness. It was fullness, waiting to be discovered. So, what is the hidden power of loneliness? It is the power to transform pain into self-knowledge. It is the gateway to creativity, the doorway to the unconscious, the path to individuation, and the meeting place with the divine. Yes, loneliness hurts. It cuts deep. But like a sacred wound, it opens you to truths you could never discover in the noise of the crowd. Maybe Carl Jung was right. Maybe loneliness isn't something to fear, but something to enter. Because only in facing it, do we find the parts of ourselves we've been missing all along. If this exploration of Jung's wisdom resonated with you, remember, you're not alone in your loneliness. We are a community of seekers walking this mysterious path together. Subscribe to the channel, share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and join me again, as we dive deeper into the hidden truths of the human mind. Until then, stay curious, stay awake, and never fear the silence.